I think after this, I've pretty much covered the whole of the Prince of Persia series. Or at least the ones that matters. Check me out taking a dump on the original 2 and the 3D game. Well, look, I've played a little bit of the very first game and haven't touched the other 2, so I can't really talk about those ones properly. And I've referred to Sands of Time enough over the course of these videos to give you an idea of what that game is like, so there's no point really. Which just leaves the 2008 release after the Sands of Time trilogy was concluded. And while I know that there are people out there that love the 2008 game, and that's cool and all, keep liking it, I think we all have an idea of what I made of this one, and that's naturally going to be viewed as a threat by some as me trying to destroy something that they love. Go and blast Unreal Tournament 1 if you want to get revenge, see if I care. Yeah, I didn't really think much of the 2008 Prince of Persia game. It was ambitious, and I honestly do think that Ubisoft was going in the right direction, but oh. They didn't do a good job of it. But let's go back in time a little bit and set the scene. The year is 2006. Prince of Persia 2 Thrones came out at the very end of the previous year, and we all got to see the end of the Sands of Time trilogy. And while some people still held out hope that the series would continue, most of us knew that this was the last one. Which was fine. No tears were shed because 2 Thrones had a pretty decent ending. Everything got resolved, the bad guy died for a second time, and the Prince and Farah might have been getting it on during the credits where we can't see them. The story has ended, the book's been closed, and all is well. But then soon after that, we begin to hear word of a new Prince of Persia title in the works. Naturally, many of us began to get very excited, and I bet you'll all be surprised that... Actually, no you won't, it's me we're talking about here. Basically, I was a little skeptical of this. I had my worries that Ubisoft were going to milk the Prince of Persia cow for every drop it could squeeze out of it, and thus ruin all the good work they had done so far up until this point. However, the details of this game were soon revealed, and I'll admit that it was my turn to be both surprised and relieved. The next game, entitled simply as Prince of Persia, which is not to be confused with Prince of Persia, was going to be a completely different story with a completely different prince set in a different sort of universe and is completely unrelated to Sands of Time. Okay, I thought, I can get behind that. Ubisoft had clearly shown respect to Sands of Time by moving away from it. That's a good thing, as now the last 3 games aren't going to get dragged into this. It also means that we can explore new mechanics, new characters, and see where we go from there. And I thought to myself that, yeah, this is the best move that Ubisoft could make with regards to the franchise, providing of course they don't fuck this one up. And while they didn't fuck it up exactly, they did make a mess of it if I'm going to be honest. That's just my opinion, okay? All opinions are fine, even ones that aren't yours. You take on the role once again as the Prince of Persia, known simply as the Prince, as of course is tradition. You've come back from some sort of adventure with gold and treasures, but it's a lot more fun if you imagine that he's just been to Egypt and got mugged off for being a tourist, and now is hauling essentially nothing but cheap goods back home, believing that it's all legit. But on the way home, he stumbles across Elika, a mysterious girl who's rich enough to wear decent clothes, even though they've been torn to shreds, but not rich enough to afford shoes, who's been chased by some dudes for unknown reasons. You save her against her will and receive a telling off for it. You soon realise that she's the daughter of some kind of king and she's fleeing because she refused to do something important. She then takes you to a temple where her father comes out and attacks you for being there. However, you also kind of unleash a naughty boy in the form of Ahriman, who begins to corrupt the land around you, which in turn threatens to spread across the world. It is now up to you to undo your screw-up by travelling to neighbouring sites and letting Elika rejuvenate the area by orgasming all over some plants. And that description is what happens when you just say things as they are. I really need to work on that. But anyway, what's the gameplay like? Well, I wasn't big on it if I'm honest. The movement and acrobatics is still good and hasn't changed that much since the Sands trilogy, as we're all good in that department. Although you've now got some sort of fetish glove that you can use to slide down walls. It's not exactly a game changer, but it looks cool when you do it at least. But the same can't be said for the combat this time round. Unfortunately, it's crap. Like, most of it is just waiting around for an opportunity, followed by a QuickTime event that requires Twitch reactions to pull off. And if you get it wrong, then I hope you like Elika because she's going to be stepping in a lot to give you an assist. At times it gets to the point where you think that it might be best if you just gave her your sword and go off and help her by looking for a Marks and Spencer's or something to get her some shoes. But all of this naturally means that combat encounters are tough. They're tough not due to the enemy being overpowered or you being underpowered or that you're just not used to the controls or whatever reason I can't think of right now. I'm so tired. They're tough because you need lightning reactions to win and there's very little room for error. But just because it's much harder, don't start thinking that you'll be dying all the time. In fact, you can't die at all. Like, even if you tried. Jump or fall off a cliff and Elika comes to save you at the last moment. About to get shafted in battle, Elika stops it from happening. It kind of defeats the purpose of a little concept known as effort if you're just going to keep bailing us out every time we mess up. Even in the Sands of Time trilogy, there was a limit to how many times you screwed up in the form of how many sand clusters you have in reserve. But here, it's all good. No punishment for judging a gap incorrectly. As I never got how Elika was strong enough to jump into a chasm and lift you out of it, but was too weak to climb fucking anything herself and needed to attach herself to you like some sort of creepy sex doll backpack when climbing ivy. You know what, I want to talk about the combat again. Because it's mostly boss fights and mini-bosses that you'll come across. But some of them are total shite, that you can only kill them in a certain way and where your sword and other attacks just won't work. There's a golem-like boss who can't be damaged at all, unless you get him right next to the edge of the arena, do some button mashing so he falls off, at which point he gets insta-killed. How are my skills in combat being tested here? The Sands of Time trilogy bosses, for the most part mind you, tested out your combat skills, your acrobatic skills, or in some cases, a boss would test out both. The final boss in Two Thrones, for example. But here, it's like you've got one and only one method of defeating that boss, and it starts to feel kind of gimmicky instead of being, well, you know, an actual battle of sorts. Another thing I'd like to complain about, and you know how much I love complaining about things that aren't really that important, but this game is in dire need of volume adjustment. Though the voice acting is pretty good and the soundtrack is also pretty good, it doesn't help that many conversations are difficult to hear when the music is blasting over it. And this is on default settings. Yes, I can go into the options menu and adjust that, but it's crazy how this is the default setting, as in, the setting that the devs thought were the best settings to use.
They've all gone over time, drifted away. When the city was
What?
in its golden
Sorry,
age,
Elika, I can't hear you. Can you speak up?
houses.
But for this next part, I'm gonna have to chuck up a spoiler warning here because I'm about to give away the ending. Even though I've definitely mentioned it before on this channel, so you're probably already familiar with this next bit, and that basically means that I'm just mumbling to myself awkwardly, and it's usually about now that you get booed off stage, but for some reason I'm still here. Anyway, I'll snap back to reality, and no, I'm not going to follow that up with an Eminem reference. The way this game ended is hands down one of the worst endings I have ever come across. You go through all of that shit to put the world right, and then right at the end, you find out that the only true way to seal Ahriman away forever is for Elika to kill herself, as her magic is the only thing that can seal him away. She does that, and she dies. The credits roll as you carry her body outside. Then the credits end and you're still playing. And there's only one thing you can do here. Cut down the magic trees, take their seeds, and revive Elika. But doing so will unleash Ahriman again, rendering everything you've done throughout the entire game as meaningless, because now we're right back to exactly where we were at the start of the game. The game literally ends with Elika looking up at the prince and asking, why? Which is the best thing that I could have hoped that she said, because that's exactly how I felt. Why? Why make everything that I've done here, every fight that raised my stress levels, all that time spent collecting fucking light seeds, and listening to these two not getting on, why? Why did you then have to go and make it so that none of that counted in the end? And that's where the game ends. Yes, there is an expansion, or perhaps this is after expansion packs died out, where we started calling it DLC, but you know what? No, I'm not playing it. I didn't enjoy this one, and I certainly don't want to play any more of it, even if it unfucks the ending somehow. Personally, I don't care. I didn't enjoy this game and I certainly don't want to experience any more of it. And this is a shame considering how good the previous games were, but I have to say that it was still the right move to make on Ubisoft's part. Because this one was not to be compared with the Sans trilogy, it didn't drag that part of the franchise down with it, leaving it intact. In conclusion, I'm certainly not a fan of this one, and I can't really recommend it either. I didn't have fun, I found it hard to get invested in the character's plight, and while I was looking forward to completing this game, just so that I wouldn't have to play it anymore, I was still gobsmacked that the worst part of the game was waiting for me right at the end. Ubisoft didn't continue this arc after the expansion came out, in favour of returning to the Sands of Time series with Forgotten Sands that came out after this one, and they just jacked the whole thing in because Assassin's Creed was taking off in the end. The 2008 version was supposed to mark the rebirth of a beloved series that could keep the franchise going for many more years, but it failed to do that, and Ubisoft clearly knew it as well. And as of June 2010, no further Prince of Persia games would have come out since, and honestly, I think that it never will come back. Perhaps one day it will get picked up again and make its way back onto the market once more with a new entry, but I can't see it coming back with as much clout that the Sands of Time trilogy had. Some people like the 2008 game. Most I've spoken to don't, and I've got to agree with them. Even putting its connection to Sands of Time over to one side, this is an irritating game with not much going on for it. You might love this one, and that's awesome. I'm glad that someone out there was able to enjoy it in my place. But I'm certainly not going to sit here and recommend this one to you. Play the Sands of Time trilogy, and then stop. Because otherwise you'll probably be joining in with Elika at the end of the 2008 game.
Why?
Sometimes I think this life is killing me.